Greeting of peace. Assalamu alaikum. We start with the greeting of Professor Said. He usually starts with this greeting to everyone. My name is Mohammed S. I'm a professor of peace and conflict resolution here at SIS since '97, and I'm delighted to welcome everyone and look at familiar faces and also a new one. Welcome to this special occasion. We've been looking forward for it for a couple of years at least. It's been in the planning. We're here to celebrate Professor Abdul Aziz Said intellectual legacy and contribution to peace and conflict resolution. We are happy to hold this first inaugural lecture to recognize and commemorate the work of Professor Said in the fields of international peace and conflict resolution. Our donor, or the generous gift that we received, will allow us to hold this lecture on an annual basis, hopefully for several years, if not many years. And this will be another platform. This will not be the only one in which the SIS and American University and we, the colleagues of Professor Said, will continue to recognize and commemorate his long and amazing research, teaching, and the practice of peace, most important as well. I just will say that I've had the honor to work with Professor Said from '96, work with him for over 20 years, and I, like many others, had the privilege of benefiting from his wisdom and ways of looking at conflicts and imagining peace work as well. His strength and his inspiration was really in the capacity to imagine things beyond what we all thought it's possible at that point, especially in the field of the peace and conflict resolution, and not by accident called the idealist in this building rather than the realist. And his work, intellectual and academic work of Professor Said, beside that, he was a peacemaker at heart. And I think that's something that everyone picked up once you spent 10 minutes with him. He knew how to make every one of us feel welcome and also included in a remarkable and inspiring way. That's something that our community continue to need. And I think particularly these days, maybe the entire country is in need for this notion of capacity to be inclusive and also welcoming all sorts of people around you. There is two comments here, a cool footnote I have to mention before I invite the next speaker. One is that I have to recognize that our colleague Chuck Cole passed away this month. And this is an occasion that I think I want to remember that and with all of us. And he actually was member of the initial committee that was planning this event last year. And the committee evolved or shifted from a big conference into an annual lecture to commemorate his work. But Chuck's spirit and Chuck's contribution ought to be recognized as a colleague, as a friend, and also as somebody who worked with Professor Said for many years. On a second note, Elena Turner, his wife, spouse, partner of Professor Said, was supposed to be here and recognized, but she had an accident today, and she's okay, but she's just unable to ride the car or move and sit on a chair. So she has something with her back. So she apologized, and we promised to pass the video to her. Without further ado, let me invite Professor and Dr. Shannon Heder, our Dean of the School of International Service, to do the introduction and the honor of opening the lecture.
Well, good evening, everyone. Good evening. All right. This is so phenomenal to see you from my perspective here. Look around, see if you can see over all the heads. We have a full in-person room. This is a really good thing, and what a wonderful way to commemorate Professor Said's spirit. It is such a pleasure for me to add my welcome to all of you to this inaugural Abdul Aziz Said Memorial Lecture. This is a time to celebrate and to recognize and to channel the energies of a legacy into our community here today. I also want to add my recognition of Elena Turner, and although she's not with us here today, I think our warmth can be channeled to her and appreciation for her support of this event as well. You know, sadly, I have only been here 5 months, so I did not have the honor of knowing Professor Said. But I do know and have heard from so many the profound effect that he had on this school, on our students, and on our community. Professor Said was said to be a tireless advocate of peace and justice. This was witnessed in his roles as Director Emeritus and founder of the University Center for Global Peace, and as the first Mohammed S Farsi Chair of Islamic Peace. He was also the longest serving faculty member in American university's history. Yeah, do you want to guess? Do we have guesses of how many years? I'm going to tell you anyway. 59 years, right? He even attended the SIS groundbreaking ceremony in 1957, where we received our charge to wage peace. Wage peace. That peace is not the absence of war, but it is a set of actions and decisions that we can promote and take and build. And Professor Said was also the founder of AU's Peace and Conflict Resolution Program. He was a legend on our campus and an inspiration and a mentor to thousands of students, colleagues, and friends. So the strength of Professor Said's legacy is the outstanding work that continues to be done in our school on the scholarship dear to his heart: nonviolence, inclusivity, human rights, religion, and the quest for sustainable peace, particularly in the global South. His legacy also flourishes with our new Said Peace Scholars Program. Do we have any of our new Said Peace Scholars here? Can you stand up? I didn't tell them I was doing that. So this is a new program for rising SIS sophomores who are interested in interfaith dialogue and peace and conflict resolution. Each cohort, which will be about 20 students each year, is selected by a faculty committee, and students have access to special course offerings, to extracurriculars, to event programming, to spring break and study abroad opportunities. And this program, we hope, advances Dr. Said's life's mission, that through the study of peace and conflict resolution and interfaith dialogue, we will all become better. And this is also where I get to repeat and channel our acknowledgement of Professor Call, who just recently passed several weeks ago, but was a very important cohort of our faculty on this mission. And in the short time I got to know him, made it very clear to me that this lecture and Professor Said's legacy was a priority for him. And he wanted to make sure that I heard that directly from him. So I feel like he's here in spirit with us tonight too. So this program and this lecture and symposium have both been made possible through the generous support of 2 of our alumni and AU trustees who were themselves inspired by Dr. Said. So thanks to Jeff Sine and Hani Farsi. Much thanks for their generous contributions to establish the Abdul Aziz Said Peace and Conflict Resolution Fund that we are channeling here today. And I also want to thank our organizers for the event today. So if you can all stand up, this includes Kate Arian, Mohammed Abu Nimar, Harach Gregorian. Go ahead, don't be shy. Stand up so people can see you. Claudine, Senge, McLeod, and Fatou Duenlan. Thank you. So with that, it is my privilege to launch the inaugural Said Memorial Lecture and to introduce our speaker, His Excellency Adama Dieng. Such a privilege to do this introduction. Mr. Dieng is a Senegalese jurist and a former United Nations Under-Secretary General and Special Advisor to the Secretary General on the Prevention of Genocide. Currently, he is a member of the UN Internal Justice Council. I'm reading all this because there's so much. If I tried to memorize it, I would get it all wrong. And these are just the highlights. He's currently a member of the UN Internal Justice Council and special advisor to the prosecutor of the International Criminal Court, special advisor to the higher committee of the Human Fraternity and the Muslim Council of Elders. He is also an honorary chairman of the Washington-based World Justice Project and the current honorary president of the International Association for the Defense of Religious Freedom. Before joining the UN, Mr. Dieng was the Secretary General of the Geneva-based International Commission of Jurists. He was appointed as the UN Independent Expert for Haiti and served in 1993 as envoy of the UN Secretary General to Malawi. He was the driving force behind the establishment of the African Court on Human and People's Rights and produced the draft of the African Convention to Fight Corruption. He is a founding member of the board of directors of the International Institute for Democracy and Electoral Assistance, as well as former president of the Martin Annals Foundation. So please join me in the honor we have to recognize and to welcome His Excellency Adama Dieng. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dean Shannon. Thank you to all of you. Allow me first also to join Mohammed and say to all of you, Assalamu alaikum. In my country, Senegal, peace is a word which written the day from the time you wake up until the time you go to bed. So it was without hesitation that I accepted your invitation. And I may say that listening just now to Dean Shannon, I can say that one of the reasons why I also accepted is what you said, the life of the late Aziz, devoted to the quest for sustainable peace, particularly in the global south. And I have devoted my life to that same struggle. And if you allow me, before I dwell into my inaugural address, share with you few words from a giant. I'm referring to Benjamin Ferencz. Do you know who is Benjamin Ferencz? Yes, he knows. Benjamin Ferencz was one of the prosecutors at the Nuremberg trial. He came to visit me, that was just before his 100 years anniversary. He's still alive. He's now 103 years old. He said to me, even in my 99th year, I keep pounding away, law, not war. Law, not war. Never give up. Never give up. Law cannot act in a vacuum. Social changes are also essential. So, Madam Dean, invited guests, members of the academic community of the American University, brothers and sisters in humanity. It is with utmost pleasure and honor to join and address the American University academic community, and precisely the School of International Service. I think, as I said, addressing you this evening on one of the most important topics of our time, advancing peace and justice in uncertain times, promises and challenges. A topic I care deeply not so much because of my previous role as UN Special Advisor on the prevention of genocide, or as head of the International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda, a tribunal which was funded to render justice in the post-genocide of the Tutsis in Rwanda. But because I wholeheartedly believe that humanity cannot achieve peace without commitment to justice and vice versa. I believe, and indeed available evidence shows, that failure to advance justice is the foremost reason to impunity, which breeds violence and instability. As once remarked by Pope John Paul VI, if you want peace, you have to work for justice. Paul VI said that. And there is also another quote I love very much from Paul VI. That's when he said that development is the new name of peace. And when you see today what is happening around the world, you cannot but fully concur with those wise words of Pope Paul VI. Imagine 1 second if the world was developed all around, but not simply a set of countries, we would have certainly faced less conflict than we are facing today. But before I begin, allow me to express my profound tribute and appreciation to my brother, but also a cherished colleague, friend, and a mentor to most of you, both students and faculty, the late Professor Abdul Aziz Said. His dedicated scholarship on peace and conflict resolution will continue to illuminate and stand out as foremost contribution to a better world. For me, an opportunity to speak in few minutes, a topic he dedicated also his entire life, is not only a privilege, but I accept this role with enormous gratitude and humility. We can all honor and remember him by dedicating our lives and work in the service of peace and justice, subject to which he dedicated his entire life. May his soul rest in eternal peace. Allow me also to reiterate my belief that there is no better place to have conversation on this topic than at the School of International Service at the American University, an old and famous institution with an illustrious history in this country and beyond, where both finest students and academics continue to engage in cutting-edge research and scholarship. Your research continues to immensely inform and contribute to the work of policymakers, both within and outside government around the world. To share my thought and engage with you all in this room is therefore a privileged task I accept with immense gratitude. Ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, when the United Nations Charter was founded in 1945, the world has just emerged from the devastating Second World War. Lives had been lost. Hopes were dashed and replaced by despair, while human rights had been relegated to the footnotes of history. The Charter was therefore conceived not as a world constitution, but rather as a universal document which could underpin collective peace and security, recognition and respect of the dignity of humankind, international law, and peaceful coexistence among nations and peoples. While the Charter has helped humanity preserve and enjoy relative peace and stability for the past 77 years, we must admit that we have fallen short as evidenced by ongoing conflicts and violence, which have caused untold suffering in different parts of the world. If we are to achieve sustainable peace, we must reaffirm our commitment to the primacy of human dignity and human rights underscored by the UN Charter. Collaboration and solidarity should be our guiding light in the darkness. The preamble of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights note that recognition of the inherent dignity and of the equal inalienable rights of all members of the human family is the foundation of freedom, justice, and peace. It is our fundamental duty that we continue to solemnly honor and apply these words, but also use the very words as standards to hold accountable those who violate them, irrespective of who they are. Our efforts to advance peace and justice cannot be achieved in a vacuum without institutional policy and, above all, political will to fight impunity and create environment for peaceful coexistence. One can construe impunity as the failure to punish violations of established norms. Impunity occurs sometimes by legal means, by adopting measures of amnesty, clemency, pardon, mercy, or any other measures taken to prevent the prosecution of perpetrators of violations. And sometimes it takes also, it can be de facto outright refusal to undertake investigations to determine the facts, refusal of the court to punish perpetrators because of political motives or through intimidation. Often the question that is usually asked is how to punish those who commit serious violations at a time when a state sets out to democratize public life. This is a matter of great concern for many countries, especially post-conflict countries, which must reconcile a politically violent past with the pursuit of national reconciliation and desire to build a future premised on a peaceful coexistence of its people. The commitment of states to human rights and peaceful future cannot therefore be credible unless the state puts an end to the conditions that destroy shared values and thus perpetuate impunity. Those who have committed serious crimes of genocide, war crimes, and crimes against humanity must be held to account. Gone are the days when people believed in the wiping the slate and starting anew. Indeed, we know that the road to national reconciliation and peace is long and full of pitfalls, which require concerned society to make hard choices on its future. Yet the truth is, amnesties should not be a scapegoat to condone impunity for serious crimes. But this criminal accountability must also be accompanied with truth-seeking, which is very important to victims. It is only when truth has been established that actual healing can take place and the victims given a chance to forgive or seek reparation. When truth and healing is in place, then we can embark on a credible reconciliation process, which will bring in sustainable peace and justice. My dear friends, justice should be considered and seen as a tool in the fight against impunity, whether within the national or international context. Within the national context, justice is a fundamental component of state governance. It is pursued not at the detriment of human rights and rule of law, but rather to advance them. It is therefore critical for a society truly committed to advance peace to demonstrate its unshakable commitment to create a conducive environment where an independent judiciary that guarantees fundamental rights and freedoms of its people, irrespective of their differences, can blossom. Every legal system, every state has its institution, its own laws and procedures, which must conform to a number of common values. An independent judiciary is the essential precondition for respect for human rights and the fight against impunity. It must be of a size and quality to guarantee justice. And this entails the existence of a comprehensive infrastructure to enable smooth administration of justice. The judiciary must be independent and impartial by law, a status which shields it from all political pressure and patronage. Remedies must be available at all levels, easily accessible and open to all citizens who consider themselves injured, whatever their political belief, ideology, religion, race, or property status. The independence of the judiciary is a sine qua non for the proper, independent, and impartial administration of justice and sustainable peace. There is a need to ensure that judges' decisions are not subject to any review other than the review proceedings provided for under the law. In order to ensure the proper administration of justice, it is necessary for judges to be truly independent. A judge's first concern must always be fairness. The judge must always be mindful of the need for a fair application of the norms and refrain arrogating to him or herself the power to ignore or to modify the norms. Nothing, however, prevents him or her from ensuring its proper adaptation. Judges must eschew any culpable complicity with the executive branch. They must throw off the instruction that certain unpopular governments attempt to impose on them in the name of justice and of the battle against impunity. While we would expect domestic judicial institutions to effectively complement the work of international and regional judicial institutions, the reality on the ground in many countries demonstrate that local judicial systems are inadequate to sufficiently respond to the demand for justice that they are supposed to satisfy. We see justice systems that have been starved of appropriate training and financial resources. Justice systems sometimes also whose officers have been bribed, harassed, intimidated, and sometimes even killed. Justice systems that have been de facto stripped of their very raison d'etre. And that is why I was mentioning to your colleague the new organization I set up, which is the Pan-African Alliance for Transparency and the Rule of Law, PATRO, which aim, in fact, to help African government to strengthen their institutions. And as Obama once said, we don't need strong men, and I add strong women, but we need strong institutions. So that is one of the reasons I said PATRO. So I would say that it is therefore extremely important that we bear in mind that in these very varied and complex challenges facing judicial institutions in most countries that have partly contributed to elusive justice, peace, and reconciliation in many post-conflict situations. We need to help those countries, and currently I'm trying to see how I can help Sudan to really address the many challenges they are facing. As you may know, I was until recently the independent expert on Sudan. And I believe, as I said to the current rulers, General Al-Burhan and Hemeti, bear in mind that if you don't leave power and return the power to the civilian, you may face justice one day. But at the same time also, I made it very clear that Sudan needs to put in place a transitional justice system. And this is where the whole issue pertaining to pardon, mercy, etc., will come in the discussion from an Islamic perspective. But this is something we can certainly discuss another time. But I would say simply that when serious violations are taking place, there should be no room for complacency. While this seems to be understood today, action is still wanting. And it is precisely the failure of states to guarantee justice for its citizens within the national governance framework that brings us to the question of justice within an international or regional context. When domestic institutions fail to address serious violations of human rights, breakdown of the rule of law, and in some instances, commission of atrocity crimes, by which I mean genocide, crimes against humanity, and war crimes, this failure or indifference prevents peaceful coexistence between national communities and constitute a major obstacle to the evolution of democracy, which guarantees respect for human rights and rule of law as a foundation for peaceful coexistence of citizens. And at the regional and international level, we have witnessed a progressive development in the quest for accountability and the fight against impunity, precisely because of the failure of national authorities to fulfill this responsibility. And perhaps the most revolutionary aspect of the evolution of human rights and the fight against impunity has been the development of the concept of individual criminal responsibility, in which individuals have become not only the subject of human rights protection, but also the object of accountability for crimes that strike at the very heart of our humanity. That's those I listed, and I can add the crime of torture, among other crimes. So the development of international criminal responsibility has occurred in three ways. The first is the establishment of international criminal tribunals to prosecute violations of international humanitarian law. For example, those committed in the former Yugoslavia from 1991 and Rwanda and its neighboring states in 1994. The second is the development of the concept of universal jurisdiction, whereby states exercise jurisdiction for crimes committed in their own territories or by their own citizens, but their commission impacts humanity at large. The third is the establishment and coming into force of the Rome Statute that establishes the International Criminal Code. And as you may know, I am one of the special advisors of the prosecutor of the International Criminal Code. So the concept of universal jurisdiction is a perfect illustration of how impunity can be tackled through international efforts when such efforts have failed at the national level. It is an important avenue to tackle impunity not only in the future, but even at present, at a time when so many violations of humanitarian law are occurring, as we witness in Ukraine. But also, this appears to be caught in between the cracks of the architecture of international justice, because on one hand, the ad hoc tribunal do not have jurisdiction over the events that generate these crimes, and on the other, the ICC, while may have jurisdiction over the crimes committed, may lack jurisdiction on the persons who committed such crimes, mainly because the individuals may be nationals of the countries that have not accepted the jurisdiction of the court. That applies to the United States of America, as you may know. They are not part of the Rome Treaty. So therefore, if an American commits a war crime, he cannot be prosecuted there. But that has been one of my biggest frustrations, to say the least. So in this case, of course, universal jurisdiction is one of the best options to prosecute such individuals. And indeed, we have seen countries, especially in Europe, where some individuals accused of worse crimes committed in Rwanda, Liberia, Sierra Leone, Syria, and elsewhere have been tried. I mean, recently there was a case in Paris where one of the genocidaires of the Tutsis in Rwanda was convicted. So based on the impact of the work of the ad hoc tribunals, like the ICTR and the ICTY, significant positive effects are already evident. I mean, today, subjecting powerful leaders and warlords to international or regional judicial accountability after the killings or repression of civilians during political instabilities is not novel. I mean, I can refer to the case of Hissène Habré, former president of Chad, who was convicted by a tribunal set by the African Union and sitting in Dakar, my hometown, where he was found guilty of crimes against humanity and sentenced for 30 years of prison. He passed away recently. So that means that 2 or 3 decades back, such an act would have been simply unimaginable. So, as a response to the genocide, war crimes and crimes against humanity, international human rights and humanitarian law have been brought back to life and nurtured in an unprecedented fashion. I mean, heads of states and high-level officials have been called to account before both national and international jurisdiction. And I can say that the ICTR and the ICTY jurisprudence have seriously challenged and reaffirmed the absolute immunity for heads of states and other high-level officials is neither warranted nor desirable. So, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, in my reflection above, I have tried to demonstrate how humanity continues to find ways to fight impunity by bringing to books those who commit gross violations of human rights and humanitarian law. Yet, despite these efforts, we must ask ourselves a question. Is it possible to build peace when injustice and impunity reign supreme? Just as Professor Said has demonstrated through years of his dedicated research, peace can only be realized when pillars of societies are anchored on justice and there is genuine commitment to prevent violence through respect of rule of law and fundamental rights and freedoms. In other words, peace does not exist in vacuum. A preventive approach and broad-based education policies are increasingly being recognized as the best option to address conflicts and violence, especially those pursued in the name of religion. That is why in the 21st century, education is a security issue and not any education, but education that specifically opens young minds to the other. Those who are culturally or religiously different, and shows them how the only future that works is one in which people are respected as equals, whatever their faith or culture may be. I will never say that my God is more beautiful than your God. My culture is richer than your culture. I have to exercise what we call in the African philosophy, Ubuntu, you know, and I have to look you in your eyes and see myself through you, and this vice versa. So, and that is one of the reasons a couple of days ago in Fez, during the Alliance of Civilization, I was saying that the Almighty God loves diversity. He is unique, but his unicity is mirrored only by the unicity of humanity. He created us diverse so that we know each other better, so that we love each other better. And the whole message of the Prophet of Islam was to compassion for the others. And that's why I said during that session, I'm ready to challenge any imam when it comes to speak about women's rights in Islam. It's because there is a lot of wrong interpretation of the Quran by conservative imam, particularly in Saudi Arabia, I mean, those Wahhabites, Salafis. I mean, we have to go back to the roots. And I always say that if people read the Charter of Medina, which has been revisited thanks to Sheikh Abdullah bin Bayya in Marrakesh The Charter was the first constitution proclaimed by Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And in that constitution, you will see that he recognized and guaranteed the rights of all minorities, religious, racial, ethnic, etc. And it was no surprise because Medina today was called Yathrib. It was dominated by Jewish. And each rabbi, when Muhammad fled Mecca, came there, wanted to welcome him. And who was the first to make the call for prayer? That was Bilal, an African, darker than I. So who protected the companion of the prophet when they went to Abyssinia? That was the emperor. He was a Christian. But he said to the people of Mecca, these people believe the same God I believe, the God of Abraham, and refused. So that was the expression of the right to asylum for the first time, guaranteed to those people. So that means we are one world, we are one humanity. But this is also, I can say, indeed, the International Peace and Conflict Resolution Program, which Professor Said pioneered for many years here at this institution, is a case in point. The culture of peace must not only be manifested in strong justice institutions, but also planted in the minds of people, especially young generation. People must see and believe that there are better ways to resolve differences peacefully. I'm one of the people who strongly believes that establishing strategy to promote peace through education can be accomplished through the incorporation of the universal values of peace, nonviolence, tolerance, and respect for human rights into all education curricula and methods. School must work towards educating students in the benefit of literacy and knowledge needed to fulfill self-development and self-actualization, in addition to teaching participation in society and how to collectively improve quality of life. I think improvement of quality of life is extremely important because today, unfortunately, despite all the progress, we are not seeing much progress in the quality of life. Indeed, peace education reaffirms the importance of human rights education. For example, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights reaffirms the integral nature of the right to education. And various articles of the Convention on the Right of the Child affirm directly or indirectly that children should be informed about rights, and states have an obligation to disseminate these provisions of the Convention widely. And similarly, the African Charter on Human and People's Rights explicitly notes that state parties to the present charter shall have the duty to promote and ensure through teaching, education, and publication the respect of the rights and freedoms contained in the present charter, and to see that these freedoms and rights, as well as corresponding obligations and duties, are understood. Ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, training of the young generation on the importance of peace should be our collective responsibility, both government and non-government partners. For example, through infrastructure for peace development, ensuring equal access to all for basic and secondary education, and through the provision of learning materials and resources, the government can act as a major catalyst in changing the values of the society. Similarly, media could play an important role in prevention by utilizing resources to disseminate the message of peace, tolerance, nonviolence, respect for human rights, and of equality. We are increasingly seeing how violent extremism and terrorism undermine peace in some of our communities. To stem them, we need to look at the grievances and local factors that these organizations exploit and the propaganda that is their key instrument in pushing vulnerable individuals down the path toward violence. When discussing the need for a shift of mindset, we need to more closely examine the underlying causes that force people to resort to violence, both in order to understand its societal impact and to come up with strategies to reduce its spread. Extremism thrives when human rights are violated. Political space is shrunk. Legitimate aspirations of citizens are ignored or crushed altogether. And many people, especially youth, lack positive prospects and meaning for their lives. More efforts are needed through words and deeds to undermine the insidious message of these groups to prevent vulnerable individuals from turning to violence. And to achieve this objective, we must empower national and local leaders to challenge extremist views through well-designed programs, training, and funding. We should recognize the added value of partnering with non-traditional actors, such as NGOs, academia, foundations, public-private partnerships, and private businesses, because these actors are often the most capable and credible partners in local communities. To make progress on this front, we must seek to resolve legitimate grievances peacefully and strive to foster good governance, reduce poverty and corruption, and improve education, health, and basic services. Once we understand the unique combination of grievances and needs that are underlying causes of this kind of violence, we can set about creating tailor-made programs and strategies in response. We should further recognize that when men and women and children go burdened with hunger, suffering from preventable diseases, languishing in ignorance and illiteracy, or finding themselves bereft of decent shelter, talk of peace and freedom that does not recognize these material aspects can bring hollow and erode confidence exactly in those values we seek to promote. And that's why I always say that there is no justice without social justice. And there is no social justice when you have large part of our fellow human beings who are not enjoying the basic minimum of their economic, social, and cultural rights. Hence, our universal obligation towards building a world in which there will be greater equality among nations and citizens as a basis for peaceful communities. Credible state institutions and government that citizens can trust are essential to build peaceful societies. It is always disheartening to see some governments around the world neglect their primary duty to fulfill this role, and instead, officials engage in misappropriation of state resources for personal gain, thus denying delivery of essential services like education, healthcare, and security to their people. Without commitment to provide these essential services to those who lack them, our hope for the world where human life is respected and rule of law honored will remain elusive. The presence of a strong, representative civil society is also an important mitigating factor. One cannot emphasize enough the important role that civil society can play in furthering justice and peace. They can do so through monitoring and reporting on local developments, advocating for action to protect the populations, and crucially, holding national governments and the international community to account for their actions and omission. I'm preparing for the 1st January 2023 an op-ed which I want to be signed by many personalities around the world to call for action in Haiti. I'm sure you are following the situation in Haiti. It's a very concerning. You could wonder where is the state when you have gangs who are finally terrorizing everyone. So we need to put, and I may certainly come and ask you also to sign that letter in support. So I would say simply that without commitment to provide these essential services, it will be difficult to achieve peace in this world. So let's hope that, as I noted, we will see a new form of a governance, because we need a new global governance. Because the UN, I think, has almost reached the level of becoming a kind of ungovernable organization. So we need a fresh organization where people's voice will be heard. I mean, the charter starts by we, the people of the United Nations, but where are the peoples? We need to find a new system, a new governance where those who are ruling will listen to their people. So we simply need to gather courage to put these mechanisms in place. Syria, Yemen, Central African Republic are the unfortunate examples of what happens when we pretend that our problems can go away by burying our heads in the sand. So before I conclude, allow me to quickly highlight one of the key areas where research institutions like yours, I believe, could make a significant contribution to further human progress in the world of peace and justice. As you may know and know better than me, one of the primary tasks of universities is to unleash their resources, which include finest minds at their disposal, to find solutions to challenges that afflict humankind. Yet, it is true that the disparity between the developed and developing world, between North and South, reflects itself also in the sphere of educational and intellectual resources. I believe that I'm not the only person concerned by the fact that research findings, especially from rich and famous instincts, while provide urgent answers to some of our common problems, require yearly subscription or payment of royalties, which in some cases are above the reach for most people in the South. Allow me to urgently implore thinkers and intellectuals both in the North and South to forge a genuine and enduring partnership to help shape a world order that provide answers to the shared and common challenges facing our people. For it is true that those ideals to which human beings give expression in our various cultures and artistic and intellectual interactions are also global realities which require global solutions. And for ultimately, if we are to succeed in nurturing peace and ending violence, we must support the building of preventive capabilities and the resilience of individual states and people. We should strengthen national institutions and processes that are responsible for the protection of populations, ensuring that they place the rights and the dignity of their people at the forefront and operate with respect for the rule of law. We must see that they manage diversity constructively so that there is no hope for the kind of grievances that create tensions between communities, tensions that can endanger peace and security of the population. In my concluding remark, let me reiterate that I have laid emphasis on the importance of states taking their commitments seriously, especially in fulfilling their human rights obligation and improving social economic conditions of their people as a requirement for a lasting peace. However, I would like to remind all of us that this obligation should equally extend to nurturing and supporting institutions created to further peace, justice, and human rights. It is only through empowering these institutions, submitting to their jurisdiction, respecting and carrying out their decisions, that they can meaningfully and broadly contribute to the prevention agenda and founding ideals of peace, justice, and equality to all of us. We live in challenging times, but all is not lost. In many countries I have visited throughout the world, one of the most common explanations given by those who have taken up arms against their respective governments is exclusion and marginalization. That's why I always insist on the constructive management of diversity. Had the government of Sudan managed diversity properly, we would not have seen Sudan splitting between South and North. But simply because there were exclusions, marginalization, and unfortunately, this is something we are witnessing in many countries of my dear mother, Africa, where we need more constructive management. So the perception of actual exclusion of certain communities or groups of people is a key driver to violence. And addressing these drivers of violence is a prerequisite for enduring peace and stability. Yet, without strong commitments from states and their institutions to guarantee equitable distribution and access to resources and provide social and economic opportunities to ensure participation of all citizens in the development agenda, peace will continue to be an elusive undertaking. I thank you for listening.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador, for your rich remark. I will not try to summarize them, but just to remind you that you took us in a journey of 4 dimensions for the rule of law, diversity, culture of peace, and peace education, and urged us to look at partnership as a method, a way to respond to many of these challenges. And of course, you gave lots of those wonderful examples as well from your rich experience. We promise people for a question and answer. Is it okay to
That's the nicest part.
So you want to join me there? I think have a microphone, and I think it'll be easier. Is that okay? Thank you. Thanks. So, thank you for your patience, and I know at least people from my class have been dealing with transitional justice and reconciliation. So this has been a very rich conversation on that. We'll take a few, probably 3 rounds of questions. So the way we'll take it about 2-3 questions each round, and then we have to get out of here around 7. So we have to be careful, 5 to 7 actually. So about 15 minutes. Thank you for reminding me. So no statements, but just questions. Unless you're creative in masking your comment as a question. Yes, so we have 1 and 2 and 3.
It's pop like this.
That would be great. Thank you.
So thank you so much, Susanna Campbell. I'm a professor here, so such a pleasure to listen to everything you said. I guess I would love to hear, given the kind of broad vision that you gave, what is your kind of personal assessment of the ICTR, right? Of the International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda, and what it did and what it didn't do, given kind of the extent of the challenges?
That is 1. Thank you, Susan. Yes, please. You can.
Assalamu alaikum, Your Excellency Dieng. I'm from Sudan. And thank you for speaking about your experience in Sudan. Sudan right now is going through a very difficult, complex time. It's a Gordian knot. You spoke about how you challenged, let's call them generals, Hemeti and Burhan, to give up power, and how you spoke to the civilians about also compromising. This is it's an impossible situation. How do we, from your experience, solve this? Is there a solution that involves immunity, or is it all about accountability for these generals? Thank you.
Thank you. And we'll take the 3rd question.
Thank you so much for your speech. It was a great pleasure. My name is Anastasia. I'm from Ukraine. And thank you for acknowledging all the hardships that my country is currently going through. I'm planning to dedicate my life to building peace in Ukraine, and advice from you would be very valuable. So Russia basically got away with committing a genocide in Ukraine way more than once. How can we ensure that this is the last time?
Thank you. Maybe we can take those 3 and then we'll take another. So we have Sudan and we have Ukraine and we have the ICCT.
Yeah, the ICTR.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, I would have to write a whole book question, but let me simply say that the ICTR was the tribunal of the premier. That is where, for the first time, the 1948 Genocide Convention was applied. And ICTR was the first tribunal where head of government, Prime Minister Kambanda, was also convicted and sentenced to spend the remaining of his life in prison. And the ICTR was also the tribunal where, for the first time since Nuremberg, a whole bunch of journalists were convicted. That was in the trial, the media trial. And this is very important. I think that case of the media trial, we need to revisit it every day, but in light of the rise of hate speech, when you see the ongoing situation now in the east part of DRC, when you see the rise of hate speech again, we need to do something. The ICTR also was the first tribunal which adjudicated a case of rape and adjudicated that rape committed under certain circumstances can be equated to the crime of genocide. So I can go on and on. But short, what are the short for? ICTR is not because of the judges, but it is because of the way the Security Council adopted the resolution establishing the tribunal. There was no room for the victims, no role for the victims. And that, thanks to the ICTR, this was corrected during the time we were negotiating the Rome Statute. So when you take the ICC treaty, you will see the victims were given a role and a place. So one thing I can say also was, what about, there was no room for compensation or reparation for the victims. So those are part of the shortcoming. But I can go list among the other achievements. Thanks to the ICTR, we're able to improve conditions of detention in many countries, providing expertise from the tribunal. On and on I can go, but I will certainly send you papers I have written about, which you will respond to your question for the sake of time. Regarding Sudan, of course, Sudan is really a situation of concern. I've been following Sudan since the 80s. We published, when I was head of the International Commission of Jurists, a report entitled Return to Democracy at the time. But that return didn't last long. General Burhan himself, when during our meeting, he reminded me that hope, 1985, 86. But that was also an opportunity for me to tell him clearly that these young people who ousted Bashir, their hope this time, they are not going to compromise for their hope. They want change. I don't want to stay in power. I am ready to leave when the conditions are met. And as you may know, there have been ongoing discussion. And now my main concern is that the sooner this arrangement is made, the better. Because I reached the conclusion that if Sudan does not resolve this crisis, you may see Islamist group taking control of that country, and that will be worse than what we are seeing today. And when it comes to the issue of accountability, I also made it very clear. In fact, my special assistant said to me, but Chief, you have been too harsh. I wasn't harsh. I would simply say the truth to Burhan. I said, where is Bashir? He is today in the darkness. Had he listened to the voice of reason, he would not have been there. He refused to cooperate with the ICC. Certainly, the indictment issue would not have come. But I said, with the millions of dollars it has stolen. For what? I said, you don't want to have the same future. And that's the truth. I'm talking to you as my brother, as an African and as a Muslim. And I think he understood, he received the message loud and clear. And the same with Hemeti. And I just read this morning a paper in which Hemeti is also condemning the discrimination against protesters. You are a protester belonging to the Islamic party, you can reach this, nothing happens. But you are a protester, the young people or the other groups, repression, you are beaten, etc. So we need to come to a solution, and as soon as possible. And then the whole issue of accountability. As I said, the serious crimes have to be prosecuted. But now we have other crimes, if the victims, because that justice belongs to the victims. If the victims, in the name of their Sharia, whatever, because their legislation provides pardon, provide compensation, they accept that, I have no problem with that. But to me, there should be no impunity. And most important also, we have to address the whole issue of the root causes. We have to know the truth, what happened, why Sudan is continuing to face this situation, and address it. And the third point, that is the issue of diversity, the issue of racism, because people don't want to say that there is racism in Sudan. You know, same like in the United Nations, there is systemic racism. You know, I worked on that issue, and the Secretary General, in fact, wanted me to come back as the Secretary General asked his question. I said, no, now I'm tired. I just want to apply. You know, we want to address the issues, try to eradicate the systemic racism within the United Nations. You see, but in Sudan, I'm glad to see that there are now some academics, some politicians who have the courage to speak out. Absolutely. You know, we need to speak out on those issues. So, and then Ukraine. No, and here also I can say we are facing failure. The international community has failed. Because when I was holding the mandate of special advice on the prevention of genocide, I saw already at that time some indicator there was risk factors in the region, and precisely in Ukraine. And I decided to facilitate even dialogue in Donbass between civil society actors. And I remember at the time even trying to mobilize the late Baba Sheikh, the spiritual leader of the Yazidis. That was in December 2015. He was invited by the Patriarch of the Orthodox Church in Moscow. And I told him, Baba Sheikh, could you please talk to the Patriarch of Moscow? It's important that he and the Patriarch Kiev get together. There's nothing more precious than this. And when I discussed that issue in New York, they said, well, you are too naive. This is also about money. So to me, we fail because we did not take action on time. We could have prevented this war, you know. Now, there is still, I still suffer when I think about what happened in Bucha. Those images to me, that was really one of the worst moments in that war. Now, can we say that genocide is occurring in Ukraine? I personally cannot say that because there has been accusation on both camps. But to my view, for sure, war crimes are being committed, crimes against humanity being committed. You have to wait until the tribunal investigate and come to before you reach the conclusion and say this is a genocide. Because one thing which is extremely difficult is to really get evidence of the crime of genocide. It's not about the physical acts, but it's more about the intent. The intent to exterminate whole or in part a group protected. In other words, protected because of its identity, racial, ethnic, national, or religious. Those are the 4 groups protected by the Genocide Convention. So it requires a lot. Okay, you may say by inference, these are like what we have seen, for example, in Ethiopia, preventing parts to move, removing forcibly population, inference, but this will require investigation. And you may understand that because of my position also as special advisor to the prosecutor of the ICC, who is now investigating the crimes committed in Ukraine. It will be for me not, I would say, wise to pronounce myself on this issue. But I can say that definitely serious crimes which are committed and for which they will have to account for it one day. I mean, and this is not new. I mean, even before the first war in Crimea, I can say war crimes were being committed at that time. And those war crimes, you can see some linkages. But I'm glad that you have decided to devote your life, like Professor Said, to promote peace in your country. So it's a very challenging. It requires some time, a lot of courage to be not discouraged in this difficult world. But like Prosecutor Ferenc was saying, never give up. Never give up.
Thank you. Thank you. So let's take one more round. Yes, please. One, and the gentleman here, there's 2, and that's a face I recognize, so Doga. And those will be the last 3, and we'll get a brief response from our ambassador. Yes, please.
Good evening, Your Excellency. Thank you for being here with us tonight. Recently, I had the opportunity to attend the 2nd week of the Convention Against Torture, and I was a bit dismayed at the disparity between the voices given to NGOs and other people from the states that were there to speak to the committee and the states themselves. And you spoke to the need for a new form of global governance. And I'm wondering if you can speak a little more about what that would look like, how it might address that disparity in which voices are prioritized, and whether or not there's a widespread support for that, or if that's still sort of up and coming.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, please, go ahead.
Assalamu alaikum, Ambassador. So happy to have you with us. So a lot of your speech focused on tools on how to gain justice and inclusivity in the global South. You briefly mentioned that the U.S. is not part of the signatories of the International Criminal Court and other organizations that seek international justice. So I'm curious to know what tools we can use to bring powerful Western nations such as the U.S. and their allies to court for war crimes committed all around the world, from Palestine to Yemen to further on Sub-Saharan Africa, and even old crimes such as during the Cold War, military coups in Latin America and so on and so forth. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, go ahead. Last one.
Hi, Ambassador. Thank you for being here and for speaking here tonight. My name is Emily. I'm a student in the IPCR program. I wanted to ask you about right now, global inequality is becoming worse and worse. And you talked a lot about the importance of civil rights civic organizations and peace building and how we should leverage those groups. So as students at American University in the richest country in the world, how can we, well, and also because of inequality and how that contributes to the lack of middle class and what that does to these civic organizations, as students in the richest country in the world, at American University that's privately funded, federally chartered, how can we sort of think about our privilege as peace builders?
Thank you. So if you kind of briefly relate to the three of them, would be great.
Yes, I mean, the first one about the global governance. I mean, there is a whole new architecture, I hope, which will be put in place. I mean, we have which I think today the limits. I mean, absolutely, we need to start the Security Council. You cannot have a Security Council with 5 permanent members who use their veto the way they like. You know, when, or even sometime when you are simply a friend of one of the members of that Security Council, you benefit also immunity, if I can say. We see the council, we have states which violate bluntly international law and no sanction, you know. So we need, therefore, to make sure, to speak from the perspective we are discussing here, to achieve sustainable peace. What is required is to invest more in prevention. I have been in my position trying to get the Security Council to address this situation in Myanmar. It was almost impossible to get the council because China would have used its veto. You have another situation where you will see United States using its veto, or Russia. So to me, the veto is an issue at stake. We have to make sure that never the P5 use the veto when there is a situation, if not addressed, could lead to genocide, crimes against humanity, and crimes. I mean, now, of course, you have the situation in Ukraine, which shows how difficult, because if one permanent member with a veto is there, the council is finally blocked. And that's where General Assembly comes. And that is why, at the request of 9 members of the Security Council, who had the General Assembly meeting to look into the situation in Ukraine and pass it a resolution. But the difference is that the General Assembly resolutions are not binding. They are not binding. So, I mean, states are not obliged to implement those resolutions, unlike the Security Council. And that's where I said, we need to have tomorrow the new organization where the people's voice will be heard. I mean, a team has been put in place by Secretary General to look into the multilateralism issue. And here also, that brings me to the question number 2, we can see how United States and United Kingdom already at the time of Thatcher were weakening the United Nations. You see, it started from there. And then, of course, it became worse when President Trump came to power. So, and then when it comes, as you say, the justice for the global south? And what about the north? We have seen cases, and I was very disappointed by President Obama not taking action on the issue of Abu Ghraib. I'm glad that one of the studies you made on that case here. I mean, it is so important, and there is a movie that I'm sure some of you have seen, the Mauritanian,
Yeah.
you know, this brings us again to the importance of the rule of law. It can be a powerful state, like you say, but if you weaken the rule of law, it will backfire. When I issued the framework of analysis for the prevention of atrocity crimes, in which it's in the website, you can get it, listing the risk factors. What are the risk factors which lead to those crimes? And the various indicators. One academic here in Washington, Strauss, published an op-ed in the Washington Post, and quoting that framework, said, well, going through this framework, I conclude that there is no risk of a genocide in the United States at the time he was writing that piece. I think that was in December 2015 or 2016. But I will not exclude war crimes happening in the United States. And I said, well, thank you very much, because you are confirming the point I always made, that there is not a single region, not a single country which is immune of atrocity crimes. It can happen everywhere. After this academic, who was the second person to confirm my assessment? President Trump himself. Hey, there's going to be a civil war in the United States. And what have we seen? We've seen a group of people going to attack what is the symbol of the democracy in this country. So that means danger. There are risks even against democracy in a country like in the Western world. When you see what is happening today in many countries in Europe, when you see populists coming to power, you see, I mean, I respect the people for their ideology, but I will not accept people who incite to hatred. That's why I was saying when I was working on the issue of hate speech, I am for more speech. I'm for more speech. But we have to monitor each inciting to hatred, inciting to violence, inciting to atrocity crimes. That we have to fight. But otherwise, let people speak freely, you see. And Professor Nimer was part of a group which helped me at the time to formulate a plan of action for religious leaders to prevent incitement to violence that could lead to genocide, crimes against humanity, and war crimes. But I think what you said is important, and there is one of my friend and former staff when I was Secretary of the ICJ, Reed Brody, who used to work for Human Rights Watch. He has published, in fact, a book addressing the responsibility of President Bush. And so that means, but the problem is, who will have the power tomorrow? I remember two African leaders meeting them at the time, saying to me, what advice could you give us? Because we are under pressure from President Bush to sign an agreement that we will never arrest any American citizens involved for the ICC. And this was in the public domain. They made it, if ever you cooperate, I will cut the military aid. He made that very clear. So to me, that is not healthy. That is not healthy, you know. So, and I always say that if there is a country which is strong, it is strong because of the respect of rule of law, respect of human rights, that's United States. But that the rule of law should not also only be perceived from a civil and political rights. You have always also to bear in mind the economic and social rights. But of course, in this country, people, the various administration for a long time did not consider the economic and social rights as having the same, I would say, importance as the civil and political rights.
A third one, maybe a word of advice at the end for the privileged peacemakers.
Well, I think I would simply give you a footnote of what I said to you last week at the Euro-Mediterranean University. I was getting a conversation with young students. And my first point was, contrary to what people are saying, you are not the future. You should be the present. And I think when you look today, I belong to the generation Z, but the generation Alpha today, young people, 3 years old, already high tech, maybe 11 years. So we have seen also a change, and we have also to adapt to this new life. And that's where, even in your work, you will have to integrate. That's the whole dimension of the social media. How tomorrow you can use the social media to make and promote peace in a more efficient, effective way. When we speak about how can we mobilize the influencers, you know, those who influence, those who have 10 million, 50 million, 100 million followers. You know, I have how many followers? Very little, because I'm old style, you know, I don't really like Mr. Trump. So to really, I think, start with that, but also the networking is important. The networking is important, networking at the local level already, but regional, national, international, but networking is very important. And whenever you see injustice being committed, speak against that injustice. You have the tool, make it, and speak out, you see. So why have we failed in recent years? Simply because we left the space occupied by the extreme right wings, including white supremacists, you know, who were attacking all type of initiatives. I mean, the attacks they made against the UN, against the international justice. We are comfortable in our chairs, not reacting, but that's where you can react. You can react and speak out, because today is yours, and tomorrow you'll be the leaders of tomorrow.
Thank you. Thank you. Please join me.